and ultimately the serfs of the Slavs said, we're not getting anything out of this. And then Russia, very shortly after that, came along and said, we're going to, get rid of serfdom altogether, which is what Catherine the Great kind of started mulling over, not necessarily in that order, not necessarily in that.
Alexander II was probably
right. That's what I said. Catherine the Great discussed it, and then she go back and forth on it. I'm just saying. I assume a lot of people with Russia kind of go back to her to begin with, but either way, right? Yeah, the fell 48ers. The 48ers came over here. Leho Kassath, right? He toured the United States. He toured a lot of the northeastern cities, where he would have the most support by these people who were also being kind of enthralled by the other financial group. But when it comes to that, right? Do we know if the 48ers were the core of this group, or if the Ashkenazi Jewish New Yorkers all the way back to the Revolutionary War and the middle colonies kind of in that vicinity, are they still a part of this, or is it specifically this core group?
The original core group were the German Ashkenazi Jews and other Protestant Marxists that came here during that time period. That was the original core. And some of them became quite wealthy, like Jacob Schiff, for example, who caused a great deal of problems with the money he made. Now, the greater population, however, came from late 1890s to 1924, when the immigration was more or less cut off. So these were the Ashkenazi Jews from the Pale of Settlement, which was part of Poland, and then it became Russian, and they were fleeing. Again, the common thing is that you'll hear is that they were fleeing the pogroms of 1885, following Alexander's death, and then a couple of others. But the main thing that they fled was when the Russians nationalized the liquor production industry. That was a Jewish industry, as was sugar, and that was 1905. And if you correlate the numbers of which they came, they correlate mainly to that event. Now, these people, some of these were Hasidic religious Jews. Most weren't at that point. They were a particular type of Marxists, a particular virulent type of Marxists. They were the Jewish Bolsheviks. So these created large numbers, and these two groups collectively made up the core of the fringe left.
Now, are the Hasidic? I think there's a lot of people that want to know the answer to this. The Hasidic, what are their ties as far as are they from the Ashkenazi group, or are they? Real quick before we go on to the next question.
Well, that's an interesting question, don't you? The politically correct answer for where did the Russian Ashkenazi come from would have been migrations from Germany. The math on that doesn't really work. It has to be augmented fairly heavily by converts, and that brings up the Khazarian theory. Regardless of where they came from, though, the population absolutely jumped. 80% of the world's Jewish population was in this Pale of Settlement at that time. That was the Jewish paradise, as it was called.
Okay. So let's move back then to where you were going with that, with the as far as the liberalism or.
Okay, so these groups form the core of the American Communist Party out of New York. Greenwich Village was the central area. And they did quite a bit to try to generate followers within the other cultures and peoples that were here. They're kind of the creators of folk music, and also not just the ADL, which came out of the Leo Frank trial from B.N. Baritz, but the NAACP. That was a Jewish organization.
So real quick, can you short summary the Leo Frank trial real quick for those people that don't know?
Okay, so that was a Catholic girl, 13-year-old, working for a pencil company in Georgia that was managed by a guy named Leo Frank, who was part of the prominent Frank family in New York. He was actually from Texas originally, but that's a longer story. I won't get into that. He had lots of sexual encounters with employees, a very foul individual. Mary wanted to pick up her paycheck on Friday. He wouldn't let her, made her come back on Saturday. She unfortunately came by herself. She was raped and killed. The suspicion fell on Frank and then a black janitor and another black employee. And ultimately, after Frank and his massive legal team tried to frame the other people, he was convicted. There were multiple appeals. He lost. Then the governor commuted a sentence from death to life in prison. Then a mob in Atlanta broke him out of jail and ultimately lynched him. This was probably the biggest criminal trial in the history of the country, certainly in the history of the South. It's certainly on a par with the O.J. Simpson trial in terms of expense once you consider the difference in the time periods and the value of the dollar. The prominent legal team members that were involved. This was a absolutely huge deal, and very few people know about it today. But it created the ADL, and it also created kind of a myth of Southern racism against Jews, which didn't exist at all, and helped tie the Jewish collective image of being persecuted to American Black history, and that was the Jewish Black Alliance.
So when we go, okay, so we talked about Harry Jaffa earlier, right? A lot of that idea that the South is racist, which if you actually look at the history, that's 100% verifiably false, unless you look at like the very fringe areas of like North Texas and Arkansas, right? Where you had this, they were so far away from people that they kind of got away with what they did. So looking back, so it's a lot of that story that showed up because of this trial, right? Because of really, it's the Jewish mythological story that they've created within the American history. So the South hating, so to speak, the black people. Is that really a reflection of what they were trying to say, the South hating Jews? So they were just kind of started grouping in these people who culturally said, we're already tired of this kind of financial group anyway, especially after, all that time in Reconstruction, and they were still theoretically in Reconstruction, right? So is that kind of, would you say that's where they got ultimately, because a lot of things start from that point?
Yeah, it did start from that point. So there was always a significant Sephardic Jewish population in the South. Yeah, so this was a distinctly different group of people. These were people from the North. They came with money. They were different. Many people found their behavior offensive, but the South didn't pick the battle there. That became the Anti-Defamation League, which evolved out of this trial, and that's where the long war against Southern culture began with. And all through this between the war period, the CPUSA membership was 60 or 70,000 people. Sympathizers were far greater than that. There was a split between them. It was internal to this group between the Trotskyites and the Stalinists. The Stalinists really were the ones that financially supported the party. But how many people were sympathized with them? Easily 10 times that. Maybe somebody said it was 20. I wouldn't even necessarily dispute that. It wasn't mainstream, but it wasn't far off from mainstream. Then after the war, the fringe left, the progressive and Marxist left that was really pretty prominent in the Roosevelt administration, along with other people, got kicked to the sidelines between McCarthy and other things. The New Right came up, which you explained with Harry Jaffa, and that Goldwater was the end of the New Right, or the Old Right, excuse me. So that was replaced by the anti-communist New Right. But the control of that at this point was still within the Eastern establishment. The Puritan legacy establishment controlled both parties. But the new left in the 60s gave a new life to the radical elements that were, again, predominantly Jewish, to rise up on the left, and that took the form of the modern neoliberalism and postmodernism. And the event that caused this collection of European Jewish Marxists, primarily Jewish anyway, I'm going to say 100% by any means, to split in two was the end of the Black Jewish Alliance. And that ended abruptly. So the black population in America were always the foot soldiers of the revolution. They were the ones that were most responsive to it. It gave it worked out, really pretty well for almost 40 years. But in the mid 60s, there were riots and a rise in black nationalism with Malcom X and then Louis Farrakhan, that saw the Jews as being paternalistic towards them, and really taking advantage of them, which was probably true. And in most of these inner city areas, the Jews filled the role of the moneylenders and the merchants, which is very much what they were in Europe for hundreds of years. And during these riots, the blacks specifically targeted the Jews and killed quite a few of them. Meanwhile, the civil rights movement was entirely a Jewish movement, with these Ashkenazi Jews making up easily over half of the marchers and rioters in the South during those few summers. But it split up at that point. So all of the people that made up the core of the almost all the people that made up the core of the neoconservative movement, as well as neoliberals, had a family background in the fringe left of American society. The CPUSA or things that were associated with it. Some of them looking at the revolt against them by black Americans, observed that they were betrayed, and they lived amongst them anyway, and many of them had grown not to like them. And that's where you saw the first people break away. David Horowitz, in his book Radical Son, really documents all of this. And is
that why? What's his name? I can't remember the name of the guy. He just passed away here. I don't know if it was this year or last year. He had his famous march through the Jewish neighborhoods. Remember?
Jackson.
Yeah, Jackson.
Yeah, okay. That wasn't actually where that was in Chicago as part of the. Well, we might have a different event in mind, but probably one of the biggest thing that marked the end of the Black Jewish Alliance was when Martin Luther King took his housing crusade to Chicago. And I think that was the summer of '68. I might have the year off, 1 or 2 years. He didn't realize that the housing in Chicago, was racially segregated, but it was racially segregated amongst Europeans. These were ethnic neighborhoods.
I think that's real quick pause. I think that's one thing we should know is that MLK's movement from the South, right, to the northern states, I think it was something where he himself was shocked because it was not as it was appeared to him, right?
Yeah, exactly. The city elders, including several black elders or councilmen, whatever they call them in Chicago, told him not to come there. Said this was a bad idea. You don't understand it. His Jewish advisors, who was the majority of his entourage, told him not to do it. He did it anyway. And what he didn't understand was the ethnic enclaves that made up these northern cities. And on one of these marches, Jesse Jackson turned the wrong way into I think it was a Lithuanian neighborhood, and he was running for his life.
Yeah. I want to talk about that. I know we keep kind of let's move back then. So MLK had essentially Jewish handlers. Is that what?
Totally, and the NAACP was too.
So that goes back to, like, we talk about Frederick Douglass, who even he had a Jewish handler, and so it's
his mistress.
Yeah, it was his mistress, and he treated his wife like the common house servant.
She was the house servant in his house, and he lived there with his German Jewish mistress.
And I think that we need to understand that when it comes to this group, especially when it comes to Zionism and the Neo Conservatism, who tend to use these groups as their foot soldiers, but essentially the new Huguenots, right? Is that they did have Jewish handlers. They were not thinking on their own. It was not an organic movement. It was one created specifically for a purpose that they wanted. It was largely economic, right? So I think that's very important that people understand that took place, and that these people had been involved in these what we call revolutions, just as Count Arthur Sheriff Spiridovich said from the beginning, from 1926.
And we'll say it's economic, but there's also an eschatological, messianic aspect to it. Marxism was really Jewish messianism without God. Okay. That's where it evolved from, and it has to be understood like that. It's a religion. Why is it intensely, whatever format, especially the Bolshevik version, why is it intensely anti-Christian? Well, because it evolved out of Judaism and the Kahal system, and specifically was a form of millennialism or messianism. The Jewish people, in this case, and I'm quoting a Jewish author here, became their own Messiah. That's the background of these Eastern Jewish elite. They all come from the fringe left, and some of them broke away. And the ones that broke away became the Neo-Conservatives, and they were followers, as you pointed out, of Leo Strauss. So you can say, be they followers of Leo Strauss or Leo Trotsky or both, that's who they were.
And if you want to know
the Christian movement in any way, shape, or form.
If we can tie it back to Judaism, because we need to, and this connection is that Leo Strauss majored in his dissertation on Moses, on Moshe Maimonides, which is, kind of the premier sage that a lot of them refer back to. And I'm not going to say that he was not insightful, because he was. If you read his work, The Guide for the Perplexed, you learn a whole lot, but you can also see where the work can be manipulated in a way that it supports the Kabbalahism and the stuff that Leo Strauss was trying to get at. Everything that Leo Strauss did was largely based off of these works, but a manipulated version, a bastardization of it, so that he could produce the dialectical history or that kind of type of thinking moving forward, which is, again, why you have that Lincoln Messiahism, and he was the Messiah in this story, and why you have an American history that's essentially mythological. You have that savior of the world, and again, that was fundamentally planted in the Office of Special Services when Teddy Roosevelt's trip to China, because they realized America had to flip the script, otherwise America was not going to be the empire. Anyway, to say it all, the Straussianism was founded in that idea, right? And so we have this another version of the American identity founded in Messiahism.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it was messianic, and Kabbalah took a variety of forms, but the predominant one after the time of Zevi was this Lurianic Kabbalah, which is probably certainly the most caustic. And when Strauss would speak, what he would speak about and how he would speak was different, whether he had a Jewish or Goyim audience.
He changed it. But to final thought on him is that Harry Jaffa was a student of Leo Strauss. He sat in on a seminar that Leo Strauss was giving at I think it was Chicago, what's the school that the Rockefeller created. It was at Chicago, and then from there, that's why the California School of Claremont's was founded in Straussianism, and you had Jaffa, and then they all of a sudden decided to hide their political views anyway. But sorry to go on. That was just
well, you had two centers of it. One was University of Chicago, Rockefeller School, and the other became Claremont, which is where Jaffa eventually wound up. The Claremont School was more aggressive, more caustic in almost all respects, and Chicago was more academic. A common quote about the Neo-Conservatives and Strauss and Jaffa in particular is they didn't have students, they had disciples.
Yeah. That's
They would attack you personally. There was no intellectual disagreement. The objective was to destroy you if you challenged them. And on the Zionist Trotsky or Marxist point, when the neoconservatives gradually broke away, they actually didn't leave a lot of the ideas. Crystal was a big defender of Trotsky, always, and he was the main writer for the National Review. He's probably the most prominent person of the movement, and others as well. Again, from another Jewish author, I don't have it up on my computer now.
Real quick,
this represented on the Marxist far left side, you had Trotsky's global revolution, pretty much. So you had Marxism, and then the neoconservative side adopted Zionism. They could have decided they're just going to live ordinary lives like everybody else, but they didn't. They had to create a new form of activism, and this became the dialectic in which we now live. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say the National Review. Tucker was talking about them, and I'm going to tie this into Buckley, right? Old Bill Buckley. Okay, is that Bill Buckley was kind of on the line until it came to kind of the planting seat, butts in the seats and donors, right, where that controlled him. Would you say that this idea that's trying to Trotsky, and I know we're kind of jumping forward in time, right? As far as like the Trotsky revolution, so to speak, is that where kind of Buckley, planted his own views with the National Review, who I think he owned it?
Yeah, it was. So, but I believe Buckley started out actually as kind of an adherent to the old right. Then he became under the influence of neoconservative writers, and he became the new right. I don't have my notes on right now, but I could quote a couple of his essays if I did. And then the new right evolved with kind of a step function into the neoconservatives, bringing in these established academics with followings. The main difference between the old right and the neoconservatives initially, especially living through that time period, the new right in the 60s, they were not established academics. They had to basically write and communicate for a living like modern podcasters. When the neoconservatives moved in, the most noticeable thing was they were already known people. They were authors. They were had positions at universities. They had a good deal of personal wealth. They had ties to power. That was the difference.
No, the new right, I know, because we often, I think a lot of people, even myself, kind of naturally meshed the new right and the neoconservative, because it was kind of like a time where it's like one happened really quick and with the other, right? Where did the two mesh together?
They meshed together right with Ronald Reagan. So a quote was, I think Crystal did it, a neoconservative was a liberal that got mugged by reality and then changed their views, but they didn't change their views very much. They still didn't. They were still globalists. They still didn't think there was anything the government couldn't or shouldn't do. and they had adopted Zionism. So again, they didn't change very much, but it was really that point in time, the events of these the breakup of the Black Jewish Alliance. And one other thing that happened then. So where did the new foot soldiers come from? Well, they started to become based on gender issues, and there was an event in Greenwich Village around that same time called this is a bar in a Greenwich Village hotel, the Stonewall Rebellion, where the traditional Saturday crowd of homosexuals and cross-dressers and whatever the heck else there'd be, instead of being peacefully arrested, which would happen on a weekly basis, they blockaded the police, then they attacked them, and this led to several days and weeks of riots, and that was the beginning of LGBTQ. So they're not that, what percentage of the population is that? Well, it's not great, but they were a very high percentage of them were activists, and a pretty good percentage of them were also Jewish. So that's how you say the neo postmodernism became the political philosophy of the far left, and right about that time period, and then just marched through the schools and universities.
Now, postmodernism, that is as well planted in kind of Jewish.
Oh, absolutely. Frankfurt School,
so
30s, 100%.
It seems to be that these, while we have, again, I know people, this is where I want to actually kind of touch up on this before we move on with this story, because this story is actually great. I think a lot of people will get a lot from this, is that the idea that while you say the right and the left, right, you really get Jewish theology and ideology in that, right?
They come from the same place.
Yeah, two sides of that plate, right? It's like it doesn't matter if you move the food you don't like to this side, or you move the food you don't like to that side, right? It's still on the same plate.
They're still evolved out of Marxism. They're still Trotskyites, pretty much at their core, which is one of the reasons on the neoconservative side it's so easy for them to hate Russia. They're Stalin, Trotsky. They're two different branches off the same poisonous tree.
Yeah. Okay.
And there's no exaggeration on that. That's Horowitz's book is excellent in this regard. It goes through the personal background of his family and many others. This is representative. This is exactly where it came from.
Okay. Now, Horowitz, is this the David Horowitz that...
Freedom Center, yeah.
Freedom Center, okay.
I think he died a couple of years, but yes.
That found himself on the old Epstein list, that guy?
No, well, specifically what he's most known for is he had kind of a later association with the Black Panthers, which were a counter movement to the Black nationalists, Malcom X and Farrakhan. Eddie Seals, I believe, in Oakland. So that's where that movement developed from. And he had a girlfriend, lover, I guess, that either died or was killed by them, or was maybe committed suicide. There are two different stories on that. So that was his kind of movement away from the left. But the book really goes through all his personal observations. I'd say, it's definitely worth the read. It's called Radical Son. But it explains in a not just a academic sense, but a very personal sense, what this breakup in the far left Jewish community was at this time, and why some of them stayed on the postmodernist side and the neoliberalism, and others gravitated over to neoconservatism. Another practical matter too, the conservatives were winning. In case of Nixon, before he was taken out with Watergate, he was the most popular president in the history of the country. I think he won 49 states, huge electoral margins. So if you want to go with the winner, that was where you go.
Yeah, and I think that's why someone like Reagan has been kind of enshrined as the president of all presidents. Right, it's
Yeah,
like it's people stop at him before they move back to people like Jefferson and
yeah.
Washington and even Monroe, and it's funny how you look at these guys. Reagan, that's the reason why Monroe becomes kind of a shadow in history versus who he was, because um, anyway, keep going.
No, I think I was about done with that point.
Okay. MLK, right? So in this, we have the two sides of the Jewish coin, right? I think a lot of people don't understand that his. I don't know. I want to kind of build back to this because a lot of people don't know who he is, right? Apart from the Jewish handlers, is the kind of I guess the parties and the what surrounded him with that ideology.
Well, he had a lot of this all goes together. Marxist people around him. He was he was the last black leader who was publicly supportive of Zionism. So the black nationalists wanted nothing to do with that. They were the enemies of Israel and the enemies of Judaism. And I'm not necessarily negative, by the way, on Malcolm X or Farrakhan. They're people. They're maligned and not taken seriously, but people should read some of what they have to say and form their own opinions on them. Really,
Yeah, I think Malcolm X. Everyone should have to listen to a few of the speeches, especially one where he called out this Jewish group, and then the other one was the bullet for the ballot box speech, which was absolutely fantastic. Um, I think that people should look at that and kind of reassess their idea of, especially history for that community, and look at the kind of the Black Jewish alignment and re-examine how that went and how the split, right? Everything that we're talking about here. The reason why I brought MLK back up is because again, he's someone who, as the one author, he was a black author, and he said that MLK parties made Diddy parties look like a Catholic mass, right? And so it was kind of like the idea that the what surrounded him, apart from the Marxists, was the parties, the prostitutes, the drugs, the everything else kind of went with this and the illicit behavior that generally followed Jewish tradition.
so that's kind of the Epstein factor, and probably our CIA had a good deal to do with that too. That was used to control and blackmail him. And I'll just throw my own opinion on here. I believe that he, kind of like Charlie Kirk, was splitting with a lot of this and got to the point where maybe he couldn't take it anymore. And he was changing his position specifically on Vietnam. The guy that was James Array, I believe, was convicted of killing him. He was the weakest of patsies. That's not what happened. And MLK's family has always said that wasn't what happened too.
Yeah, and I think you can see that. I think that you have those release files where it happened to be one of the ones that was not redacted, where it's like, hey, we're done with you. Go ahead, kill yourself, right? And that it was problematic. His view on Vietnam was problematic to LBJ, but LBJ was problematic to himself.
Vietnam was a huge deal at that time. If you had that was the military-industrial complex. That was the justification for existing. If that was shut off, firmly rejected, and not replaced with something, that was really a civilization changer. That is hard to overstate how big an issue that was.
Now with that, okay, so I've been thinking about this lately as far as the industrial complex situation goes. When that shut off, because that shut off, and then you had the kind of the rise of the education industrial complex at the same time. Was the one shut off and the second one, as the replacement?
There's a little bit of a relation like that. After Vietnam, say if you were in like 74 or 75, there was no tolerance for any sort of foreign adventurism. And there was also no belief that we had any inherent capabilities that anybody else didn't have. When Reagan came into office, he gradually reintroduced this against some dramatically weaker opponents, and suddenly we could win again. But it was like winning a football. It was like Alabama playing Tijuana Tech. You wouldn't expect anything other than that. It was a very controlled outcome.
You expect the outcome itself.
Yeah.
Okay. But I think, okay, so then I guess that goes back to the education industrial complex, that you had to kind of reinvent the idea of foreign adventurism, right? So I guess that's what the question is that where that, because you start to see that dialectical, like, oh, nobody likes isolationism, it's stupid, right?
Oh, yeah. Stupid isolationist, yeah.
And that's where that narrative came out of. It really came out of the mid '70s, moving forward in the '80s, kind of. So I'm not saying,
with if we mind our own business, then the whole globalism concept doesn't work, and without the petrodollar, we wouldn't have been able to largely live at the expense of other people and export inflation elsewhere. There's a lot riding on it, and really, the neoconservatives in particular, they can talk philosophically, but when it comes right down to it, this is a matter of economic, political power with some religious aspects to it, and they don't really care what you think. They're just going to do what they're going to do,
right,
one way or another. The only thing that stops them is a kinetic war, and that's what you're seeing right now.
And that's why they move kind of forward war all the time.
But unfortunately for them, they're generally political scientists. They're not real scientists or engineers. They don't know how to do what they want to do, and eventually they come up against opponents that they can't defeat, and that's what's happening now.
Now, right, but so, okay. Now, is this a flaw of their overall plan where they take over the churches, they take over the government, they take over education because they want that alliance reinstated, which is why a lot of the narrative happened that way, is that they were trying to reinstate that and impose their own character on that. And then you have, like, moving forward, so now we got the church, the government, the education system, and then it's like, well, everyone's going to support this war. We know we're going to win, right? Is that how we made it all the way up to where we're at?
It is. The real enemy ultimately is Christianity. They want people to act and think like they're basically debt slaves, they're economic entities, and they're so afraid of being canceled either economically or socially that they'll just go along and do what they say. When you have people who don't go along with that, they say that, my loyalty is to truth, my loyalty is to God, I'm going to stand up to you no matter what happens to me. Then the whole thing breaks, and it doesn't take a majority. It might take 10%. And hopefully that's what we're seeing now, where you have enough insignificant little people like us that are awake, and at least when everybody listens to us or not, we're willing to say things, notice things. I use that notice word there, note.
We're noticers.
The noticers, yeah, and just aren't going to go along with it. But it takes a degree of spiritual and intellectual strength on the population, part of the population. And Iran, especially someone my age that went through the hostage crisis and everything, it's very easy to see them in a very negative point or perspective. But the majority of the population there is morally committed to defeating the collective West, and especially the United States. If they were acting in their own immediate economic best interest, they'd fold. But so that's why it's really shocking to so many of the neoconservative thinkers that they just didn't behave like they're supposed to behave.
Yeah, I think that, and okay, so I think that has to. I think that this conception with this group. I would argue heavily that it's the idea that the neoconservatives have gone largely unchallenged. People have just been yes men around them. You see this with, again, I know you're part of this generation, so I know you get tired of hearing it, but you had the boomer generation, the kind of that generation under you guys, right? You see that now, especially in the education business. You have a lot of yes men. So when things start to fall apart, you're like, it's because everyone keeps saying yes, which gives the appearance that they have control. And for some reason, this 5-6% of the world's population here in North America gave them the idea that they could then go and do what they do somewhere else and have those groups that they're trying to, help cause a revolution, go along with them. And then when it doesn't happen, it's like, well, crap, it happened here. Why didn't it happen here?
Yeah, that's basically correct. They project their own values or lack of values on everybody else. And when that projection's not accurate, their system starts to collapse.
Yeah, they don't really know. They don't really know how to reboot, right? They keep plugging along, and that's why Trump is in the situation he is because it's like they don't know how to reset or how to evaluate. It's a really stupid group, right? You have the Puritan Jewish alignment, or the whatever's left of the Huguenots at this point. It's like they're really not as intellectual as they appear to be, and that's why we have the intellect of everybody else moving downwards, because they have to get everybody underneath them
to make them dumber.
Yeah, and they're dumb, so they have to get everyone dumber than them, and so it's just interesting. The neoconservative is a group that I think are largely not noticed because they're not talked about, because a lot of people kind of like, it's like Zionism. They shrug it off as either a different definition or as doing not what they have done. But when you look at the history of these groups, you go, man, this has been happening. This is real. It is damaging to not just America but Western civilization in general. Right? What happened in 1964 was almost the beginning of what I would say it really was the death to America and the rest of whatever existed of Western civilization. Barry Goldwater, like him or hate him, right? He was the last guy to truly stand on what he believed, and he held to that even after that run. He was asked the same questions, and he said, "I'd stick to the same thing. I'd say the same thing. Nothing has changed between now and then, right?" Versus Trump, who something's changed from his first presidency to the second one. That was the last hope, I think, that America really had to survive.
You brought up a good point before when we talked about these ethno-religious cultural groups. When we are taught to think of everything as philosophy and to see political parties but not to see anything other than that, these are cultures. And they've existed a long time. They have certain characteristics that are far more consistent than any sort of change of political philosophy or current events. And once you see that, then a lot of other things really make sense. They're also individuals with personal histories that have a lot of commonality. This drives them as well, and that explains so much.
A lot of people, and this is where I go to like identities and history, right? We label things wrongly of state identifications, right? We got the Dutch East India Company, the English East India Company, the French East India Company, right? We have those labels, but what we don't get is that they were all the same group after they merged, of course, and they were tied in not by nationality, not by government association with the flag, because the flag changed constantly, and you can see that. You had merchants change from one company to the other, charter this, charter that, right? They were largely defined by their ethnic or religious background, or both, the ethno-religious idea, right? The Puritan and Jewish and Huguenot alignment was held together specifically by the ethnic religious concepts, right? That is how they define themselves, right? When we say, oh, don't call them Jewish, it's like they called themselves Jewish. They were Jewish, Puritan, Huguenot alignment, and that's what they said. They were very open about that. They didn't hide it. That's the one
And
thing.
what tied these groups together? They weren't. Now, Judaism is not really an ethnicity, but it was religious concepts that were shared between these groups. That's what made them function together and actually look a lot like each other in a practical sense.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I guess last question, because we've made it this far with the neoconservative, neoliberalism, and Zionism. Where do we tie that into the men who the puppeteers of Trump?
Well, they're all Zionists. They're not real smart, especially the Treasury Secretary Bennett. They believe they're invincible. They believe that everyone else thinks and acts around the world the way they think and act. They project themselves. They move one step at a time. They are all around Trump, um, and they might have other points of leverage on him too. I don't really know, but the just and you see. By the way, you see this also in the other European liberal quote unquote democracies. Uh, they're not exactly the same, especially with regard to Israel, but they don't seem to learn at all, and they think they can use economic leverage to control everybody, but they don't produce anything. They don't
Yeah,
produce anything other than currency.
and that goes back to last week. It's like you have to. It's like eventually it folds on yourself, right?
It does.
If
Yeah.
you don't produce anything and nobody else produces anything, right? It's like eventually you have a genocide of the world's population.
Yeah.
And so to cap it off, right? And that's an interesting point. And that's why, like I say, the guy, my Thomas Handyside Perkins was, I'd say, the textbook specimen for what you should do to make a civilization survive. And I don't care at all the fact that he was an opium merchant, right? It is what it is. That was the market that was available at the time that made the most money, and you needed it, right? But he was a textbook of make capital, build industries that produce things so that your country could start to thrive that way, right? And that's where I think a lot of people, when you shake off in history those guys who did something like that, and then started idolizing the usury groups. I think that's when you kind of have this false sense of reality and what makes things work, right? You can't just create this global economy that produces nothing tangible.
And the specifically Jews for almost entirely, Puritans, the Huguenots that you mentioned, who were like the foot soldiers for the revolution for a long time. These were merchants. They didn't produce anything.
Yeah, they never
And they
have.
tried to make money off of capital. They were not, they were dependent upon being able to take things from other people.
Yeah,
That's simple.
and you look at the Rothschilds, like Mayor Amschel Rothschild, and even the Radianites, who kind of started that group and moved from Bordeaux, France, to the East Indies, is that they made their profits, even the Sephardic Jews and the Ashkenazis, off of usury, currency exchange versus anything else. Like that was their main thing. They were and even the Protestant types like Jacob Fugger, was all off of usury. It was nothing off of production.
And that's why they were so opposed to the Catholic Church.
Yeah, because they had the usury laws.
Yeah. And be clear on usury. This isn't just money lending in a general sense. The bulk of this was loaning money at extremely high interest rates to extremely naive people who were never going to be able to pay it back. It was illegal here. That was called loan sharking. That's why the mob did it initially. Now it's basically legal as part of the credit card business.
Yeah, yeah, and every other thing that takes a loan, right? All right, to cap it off, right? History is moving in an interesting direction with this, right? You have universities that can't hardly put butts in the seats. You have public school systems that are losing enrollment by the hundreds. I'd say I'm not gonna say thousands yet, but by the hundreds, right? And teachers are running away from it. With these groups and even churches, right, are starting to see, kind of at least Protestant churches are seeing an exodus, so to speak. How do you think history will now remember that group versus, like, say, 20 years ago?
Oh, probably one of the darkest times collectively in Western civilization, where we had lost everything that made Western civilization what it was, and we're proud of it.
Okay. So they definitely won't be like a flashpoint in history, but there'll be a group that kind of I think we're starting to re-image what we think of this group, and we're acknowledging actually that they existed. Would you say that's correct?
Yeah, I would say that's correct. And ultimately, the thing that will maybe save us is it's an intellectual awakening, but it's also a repentance. And you have to get rid of the idea that we're always the good guys, and that specifically going back to the Enlightenment, and that the Enlightenment was a morally positive thing. It wasn't.
Yeah, that's another one. We'll have to have that topic on here because I think that's equally as interesting as this group. Anyway, we'll cap it off there. I think that we have kind of touched up on essentially this era and kind of where these groups came from and how history has been framed. And I hope people understand that history has been framed. Nothing they've learned has been reality. It's been, again, 1% truth, 99% false, down to even the question of the slaves and the American war between the states. Everything that they know has been framed not in reality, but the idea of this projection of this group onto other people's.
Yeah, we live in a snow globe that other people have shook.
Yeah, and that's exactly the point, right? And you have not just this the breaking of the Black Jewish alignment, but you have the slave narratives, which is not Stockholm syndrome. It is reality and truth and history. So 100% different than what's being said now, and that's why they stopped those slave narratives in the first place, because they were not working the way they wanted them to. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you go and look up more on this topic, and if you want to know more, you want to have a question from this that you want us to address, please comment in the comment sections, and I'm going to start putting up the email. The email is going to be info@the dissentinggoyim.org or Dissenting Goyim Media Group. .org, and we will have one there. I see that you guys want some merchandise, and we will start building merchandise. We're building a website for you guys to go on and order that. So we're just kind of finalizing the building of this corporation, or the company of the Dissenting Goyim Media Group. So please, guys, you will find us on Rumble, Substack. You'll find clips on X. You'll find some stuff on Facebook. It'll be just clips. And you'll find us primarily on YouTube right now. But I am going to set up this weekend the podcast so that you can hear us in your car on things like Spotify and Apple while you're driving. So you don't have to pull up YouTube. You can just pull up your Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever streams it, and listen to it while you're driving to work. So we appreciate your time and listening to this episode. We appreciate you in general, you as fans. We love it. We're grateful for your support. Again, guys, as you see this on Monday, you will understand, you will see that the Dissenting Goyim Show Sports will be out. Pop Culture and a Cold One will be out with their new episode. And so we'll have the Dissenting Goyim, and look out for more projects that we are kind of looking at currently. So again, please, if you're watching this, like, share, comment, subscribe, please. Everything helps, guys. And I am going to start with the group, or not the group, but essentially the Enlightened Goy Club, where you can get access to extra material and these shows earlier. This will be on the website soon. When I get the website rolling. So please stay tuned. We got a lot of good things coming up for this company that I think that you will like. Or actually, I know that you will like. So stay tuned. Thank you. We appreciate your time and your business. And so long. Farewell. See you next Monday.